Lesson 2, we're talking about the prologue, the chorus, and the opening scene of the play. I told you last time that the first thing we're going to look at the cast of characters, and I want to do it now. So there are a lot of characters, there are over 20 in this play, but I think we can simplify things a little bit by creating a table. On one side we will put the Montagues, on the other the Capulets. For this, the Montagues, Montague, Lady Montague, Romeo, Benvolio, Balthazar, and Abram. And then there are some who are not members of the family. On the other side, Capulet, Lady Capulet, Juliet, Tybalt, Samson, and Gregory, who you will meet soon. And then the nurse is not a part of the family. But you will see in the table that actually those characters are matching very nicely in the play, and they are basically equivalents for each other, for the two sides of the family. This makes things a lot easier to understand as we read. When we keep this in mind, the characters are equals with each other on both sides of the family. Moving from there, we can actually get into the play itself with a prologue. So for the chorus comes from Greek theater. And the purpose of the chorus is to serve as the audience itself. It explains what's happening. It summarizes. When we look at the chorus here, you'll see that the chorus tells us a little bit too much. You might have heard of the phrase spoiler alert. That's when you tell someone the ending of the movie. They might not want to know who dies at the end, who gets married. The chorus here actually ruins the play for you if you don't want to know what happens at the end. Let's take a look and see how it does that. It sets up the scene by telling us that there are two households, Capulets and the Montagues, and they are both alike in dignity. Like I said, the characters match up on both sides. It also tells us the setting. It's in Verona. It's not actually very important for our reading, but that when the scene is. And tells us what's going on with these families. They says from ancient grudge to new mutiny. The sense of that word ancient has been going on problem between the households for a very long time. And now, in this scene, in this play, there will be a new mutiny, a new problem. It actually makes use very interesting literary device, antithesis. When you take two words that are opposites and then you use them in the phrase. Here we have ancient, very old, and then new. After that, it tells us a little bit about what's going to happen in the play. It doesn't use the names Romeo and Juliet yet, but it says a pair of star-crossed lovers, star-crossed, ill-fated. Bad things are going to happen to them. And they came from their parents, paid to loins. Loins means they gave birth to them. They're the parents. But what happens? In line 8, you'll see it says, doth with the death bury their parents' strife. Doth with their death means they're going to die. We already know the very first page that Romeo and Juliet are not going to make it. That's a spoiler. Notice the word doth in previous misadventured. This is called archaic diction. Archaic diction is the use of words that we no longer use. Doth, for example, is does or do. And misadventures, just means bad things happen. After that, it tells us a little bit about how they're going to die. It tells us explicitly that they will take their life. They're going to commit suicide. On the first page, we already know the tragic ending. The chorus also tells us how long the play will be, which might be nice. It says there are 2 hours traffic of the stage, so the play takes about 2 hours. And then the final line of the chorus, they say that if you watch the play, we will tell you how this happened. What we didn't tell is like our work. What here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. So if we do not know yet, then we will learn while we read. Spoiler alert. Moving from there, let's take a look at Act 1, Scene 1. And we already know where we are. We're in Verona. If you see the stage direction, it tells us that Samson and Gregory enter, armed with swords and bucklers. The sense here already is they want to fight. The swords, the bucklers are kind of shield. We already have the kind of stage direction, idea of violence. We already see this in Gregory and Samson's dialogue as they speak to each other. They use a play on words holes, colliers, collar, and collar. You notice all those words are very similar. That's because they're called homophones. Homophones are two words that sound the same but have different meanings, like the word orange. And like orange is a fruit and one is a color. Here we have coals. To carry coals means a job of a coal miner. And then colliers also means idea of carrying coal. And then collar means anger. And then collar, this is the collar around your neck. The movement here that I would say is carrying coals is a job. You're a coal miner. And then tying this together with a homophone of collier, you have the word anger. So Gregory's job and Samson's job is anger, and that ties with their swords. And then the collar is part of the meaning of the play, because this ancient grudge of the family, it is a collar on the family. It's a collar that leads them to great violence, which also leads to death of Romeo and Juliet. And when they can take off the collar, free themselves of the violent anger, can they overcome this long-held grudge. So homophones. Let's move on. There are more play on words, which means Samson and Gregory are funny characters. We see how Gregory and Samson talk about the meaning of word move versus stir. The lines go, Samson says, "A dog of the house of Montague moves me. To move is to stir. To be valiant is to stand. Therefore, if thou art moved, thou runst away. A dog of that house shall move me to stand." You can see how they're playing with the words move and stand. And actually, in staging of this, we might want to use, that's a great humor. Those characters are violent by nature. The violence continues, especially when two more characters enter the stage, Abram and Balthazar. If we look at our table again, and we'll see that Balthazar and Abram, they're equals in from the house of Capulet and the house of Montague. Draw thy tool, he says. The tool he's speaking is the sword. Samson says, my naked weapon. So he is actually taking out his sword when they enter. What they want to do is they want to start a fight. Samson says to Gregory in aside, which I mentioned last time, this means no one else can hear it, only Gregory can. He says, is the law on our side if I say A? And Gregory has an aside, no. The use of the aside is very interesting because they're trying to start fight with Abram and Balthazar and they're on stage, but the aside means they can't hear it. It also can be used for great humorous effect to show that these two characters, Samson and Gregory, although they're very violent, they're still afraid of something greater than they are. They're afraid of the law, which is represented by the prince, who speaks at the end of this opening scene. So let's look at the swords. We'll see after Abram and Balthazar enter and a fight begins, it says in stage direction, they fight. We have the entrance of another character, Benvolio. If you saw the Benvolio, it matches up with Tybalt, who is going to enter right after him. And he says, Benvolio, to all those four people fighting on the stage, put up your swords, you know not what you do. There has been an entrance of then the swords, draw thy tool, my naked weapon is out, and the fight. If you look at the sword, it gives us the chance to look closer at the archetypes in literature. Archetypes are types of symbols that throughout history they've been used over and over again for the same meaning. It might remind you of tropes from last time. A trope was a story that is told over and over again, so we already know what to expect. like a boy means girl. And when you see a sword or a knight or a dagger or a gun, we might think of it as an archetype, specifically a masculine archetype. Masculine archetypes are those that represent commonly held ideas of what masculinity is. Men in literature are strong. They like violence, destruction. That's versus feminine, very often are flowers, houses, things that comfort us. They're beautiful. Not to say that all men are violent, not to say that all women are beautiful. Just to say that these archetypes have the meaning in literature. One archetype you'll see throughout the play is the archetype of the sword as a symbol of violence. One more archetype I want you to look for is the idea of light and the sun versus darkness and the moon. And look at those as we go through and think about what they might mean for the book as a whole. And we'll talk about that later. Moving through, we see the Benvolio trying to stop the fight, and then Tybalt, his equivalent on the other family, enters. And he starts a fight with Benvolio. Now on the stage we have 6 people all fighting each other. The violence is clear. Stage direction tells us that these characters, too, Tybalt and Benvolio, fight, and then several other citizens. The stage direction says, clubs, bills, partisans, strike, beat them down, down with the Capulets, down with the Montagues. A very violent scene overall. Even Capulet and his wife, and Montague and his wife, they both come. And the guys want to join the fight. Give me my long sword, Montague says. Thou, valiant Capulet, hold me not, let me go. The only ones we have here who do not want to fight are female characters, Lady Capulet and Lady Montague. Lady Capulet says to her husband when he calls for the sword, a crutch, why call you for a sword? And Lady Montague says to her husband, thou shalt not stir 1 foot to seek a foe. Do you see how these archetypes are at play? The sword as a masculine symbol and violent, and male characters are violent, but 2 female characters that are first introduced are calling for peace. Very interesting. Want to take a look at one more thing, and this is a little bit complicated, but we want to look at the syntactical structure of the lines, because the way Shakespeare uses it, he wants to let us know the status of the character. We can do this by looking at the lines of Capulet and Lady Montague, and we want to do something that sounds complicated, but we'll count the number of syllables, the number of sounds. What noise is this? Give me my long sword. A crutch, why call you for a sword? You see how those lines have 10 sounds, 10 syllables? This is a pattern called iambic pentameter. And you'll notice that Tybalt and Benvolio speak in the same pattern. Benvolio, I do but keep the peace, put up thy sword. 10. Now, if we look at Samson and Gregory and Balthazar and Abram, they don't speak like this. Why not? Characters, they speak in 10 syllables, or in the iambic pentameter, they're characters of royalty. We can see in the text the status of the characters. Are they from nobility? Do they have money? Are they educated? They will speak in iambic pentameter, and if they are not, then they won't. Very interesting, I think. And for next time, we'll finally get to meet our characters, Romeo and Juliet.